Chapter 4. Our table was nearly bumping up against the stage. The room was full of liquor and laughter, and a few faked screams as the vampire waiters moved around the tables. There was an undercurrent of fear, that peculiar terror you get on roller coasters and at horror movies. Safe terror. The lights went out. Screams echoed throughout the room, high and shrill. Real fear for an instant. Jean-Claude's voice came out of the darkness. "Welcome to Guilty Pleasures. We are here to serve you, to make your most evil thought come true." His voice was silken whispers in the small hours of night. Damn, he was good. "Have you ever wondered what it would be like to feel my breath upon your skin, my lips upon your neck, the hard brush of teeth, the sweet, sharp pain of fangs, your heart beating frantically against my chest, your blood flowing into my veins, sharing yourself, giving me life, knowing that I truly could not live without you, all of you?" Perhaps it was the intimacy of darkness. Whatever, I felt as if his voice was speaking just to me, for me. I was his chosen, his special one. No, that wasn't right. Everyone in the club felt the same. We were all his chosen. And perhaps there was more truth in that than anything else. "Our first gentleman tonight shares your fantasy. He wanted to know how the sweetest of kisses would feel. He has gone before you to tell you that it is wondrous." He let silence fill the darkness until my own heartbeat sounded loud. "Philip is with us tonight," Monica whispered. "Philip!" A collective gasp ran through the audience, then a soft chanting began. "Philip, Philip." The sound rose around us in the dark like a prayer. The lights began to come up like at the end of a movie. A figure stood in the center of the stage. A white t-shirt hugged his upper body. Not a muscle man, but well built. Not too much of a good thing. A black leather jacket, tight jeans, and boots completed the outfit. He could have walked off any street. His thick brown hair was long enough to sweep his shoulders. Music drifted into the twilight silence. The man swayed to the sounds, hips rotating ever so slightly. He began to slip out of the leather jacket, moving almost in slow motion. The soft music began to have a pulse that his body moved with, swaying. The jacket slid to the stage. He stared out at the audience for a minute, letting us see what there was to see. Scars hugged the bend of each arm until the skin had formed white mounds of scar tissue. I swallowed hard. I wasn't sure what was about to happen, and I was betting I wasn't going to like it. He swept back his long hair from his face with both hands. He swayed and strutted around the edge of the stage. He stood near a table, looking down at us. His neck looked like a junkie's arm. I had to look away. All those neat little bite marks, neat little scars. I glanced up and found Catherine staring at her lap. Monica was leaning forward in her chair, lips half parted. He grabbed the t-shirt with strong hands and pulled. It peeled away from his chest, ripping. Screams from the audience. A few of them called out his name. He smiled. He was dazzling, brilliant, melt-in-your-mouth sexy. There was scar tissue on his smooth, bare chest. White scars, pinkish scars, new scars, old scars. I just sat staring with my mouth open. Catherine whispered, "Dear God." "He's wonderful, isn't he?" Monica asked. I glanced at her. Her flared collar had slipped, exposing 2 neat puncture wounds, fairly old, almost scars. Sweet Jesus. The music burst into a pulsating violence. He danced, swaying, gyrating, throwing the strength of his body into every move. There was a white mass of scars over his left collarbone, ragged and vicious. My stomach tightened. A vampire had torn through his collarbone, ripped at him like a dog with a piece of meat. I knew because I had a similar scar. I had a lot of similar scars. Dollar bills appeared in hands like mushrooms after a rain. Monica was waving her money like a flag. I didn't want Philip at our table. I had to lean into Monica to be heard over the noise. "Monica, please, don't bring him over here." Even as she turned to look at me, I knew it was too late. Philip of the many scars was standing on the stage, looking down at us. I stared up into his very human eyes. I could see the pulse in Monica's throat. She licked her lips. Her eyes were enormous. She stuffed the money down the front of his pants. Her hands traced his scars like nervous butterflies. She leaned her face close to his stomach and began kissing his scars, leaving red lipstick prints behind. He knelt as she kissed him, forcing her mouth higher and higher up his chest. He knelt and she pressed lips to his face. He brushed his hair back from his neck, as if he knew what she wanted. She licked the newest bite scar, tongue small and pink, like a cat. I heard her breath go out in a trembling sigh. She bit him, mouth locking over the wound. Philip jerked with pain, or just surprise. Her jaw tightened. Her throat worked. She was sucking at the wound. I looked across the table at Catherine. She was staring at them, face blank with astonishment. The crowd was going wild, screaming and waving money. Philip pulled away from Monica and moved on to another table. Monica slumped forward, head collapsing into her lap, arms limp at her side. Had she fainted? I reached out to touch her shoulder and realized I didn't want to touch her. I gripped her shoulder gently. She moved, turning her head towards me. Her eyes held that lazy fullness that sex gives. Her mouth looked pale with most of the lipstick worn away. She hadn't fainted. She was basking in the afterglow. I drew back from her, rubbing my hand against my jeans. My palms were sweating. Philip was back on the stage. He had stopped dancing. He was just standing there. Monica had left a small round mark on his neck. I felt the first stirrings of an old mind flowing over the crowd. Catherine asked, "What's happening?" "It's all right," Monica said. She was sitting upright in her chair, eyes still half closed. She licked her lips and stretched, hands over her head. Catherine turned to me. "Anita, what is it?" "Vampire," I said. Fear flashed on her face, but it didn't last. I watched the fear fade under the weight of the vampire's mind. She turned slowly to stare at Philip as he waited on the stage. Catherine was in no danger. This mass hypnosis was not personal and was not permanent. The vampire wasn't as old as Jean-Claude, nor as good. I sat there feeling the press and flow of over 100 years of power, and it wasn't enough. I felt him move up through our tables. He had gone to a lot of trouble to make sure the poor humans wouldn't see him come. He would simply appear in their midst like magic. You don't get to surprise vampires often. I turned to watch the vampire walk towards the stage. Every human face I saw was enraptured, turned blindly to the stage, waiting. The vampire was tall with high cheekbones, model perfect, sculpted. He was too masculine to be beautiful, and too perfect to be real. He strode through the tables wearing a proverbial vampire outfit, black tux and white gloves. He stopped one table away from me to stare. He held the audience in the palm of his mind, helpless and waiting. But there I sat staring at him, though not at his eyes. His body stiffened, surprised. There's nothing like ruining the calm of a 100-year-old vampire to boost a girl's morale. I looked past him to see Jean-Claude. He was staring at me. I saluted him with my drink. He acknowledged it with a nod of his head. The tall vampire was standing beside Philip. Philip's eyes were as blank as any human's. The spell or whatever drifted away. With a thought, he woke the audience, and they gasped. Magic. Jean-Claude's voice filled the sudden silence. "This is Robert. Welcome him to our stage." The crowd went wild, applauding and screaming. Catherine was applauding along with everyone else. Apparently, she was impressed. The music changed again, pulsing and throbbing in the air, almost painfully loud. Robert the vampire began to dance. He moved with a careful violence, pumping to the music. He threw his white gloves into the audience. One landed at my feet. I left it there. Monica said, "Pick it up." I shook my head. Another woman leaned over from the other table. Her breath smelled like whiskey. "You don't want it?" I shook my head. She got up, I suppose to get the glove. Monica beat her to it. The woman sat down, looking unhappy. The vampire had stripped, showing a smooth, expansive chest. He dropped to the stage and did fingertip push-ups. The audience went wild. I wasn't impressed. I knew he could bench press a car if he wanted to. What's a few push-ups compared to that? He began to dance around Philip. Philip turned to face him, arms outspread, slightly crouched, as if he were ready for an attack. They began circling each other. The music softened until it was only a soft underscoring to the movement on stage. The vampire began to move closer to Philip. Philip moved as if trying to run from the stage. The vampire was suddenly there, blocking his escape. I hadn't seen him move. The vampire had just appeared in front of the man. I hadn't seen him move. Fear drove all the air from my body in an icy rush. I hadn't felt the mind trick, but it had happened. Jean-Claude was standing only 2 tables away. He raised one pale hand in a salute to me. The bastard had been in my mind, and I hadn't known it. The audience gasped, and I looked back to the stage. They were both kneeling. The vampire had one of Philip's arms pinned to his back. One hand gripped Philip's long hair, pulling his neck back at a painful angle. Philip's eyes were wide and terrified. The vampire hadn't put him under. He wasn't under. He was aware and scared. Dear God. He was panting, his chest rising and falling in short gasps. The vampire looked out at the audience and hissed, fangs flashing in the lights. The hiss turned the beautiful face to something bestial. His hunger rode out over the crowd. His need was so intense it made my stomach cramp. No, I would not feel this with him. I dug fingernails into the palm of my hand and concentrated. The feeling faded. Pain helped. I opened my shaking fingers and found 4 half-moons that slowly filled with blood. The hunger beat around me, filling the crowd, but not me, not me. I pressed a napkin into my hand and tried to look inconspicuous. The vampire drew back his head. "No," I whispered. The vampire struck, teeth sinking into flesh. Philip shrieked, and it echoed in the club. The music died abruptly. No one moved. You could have dropped a pin. Soft, moist, sucking sounds filled the silence. Philip began to moan high in his throat, over and over, small, helpless sounds. I looked out at the crowd. They were with the vampire, feeling his hunger, his need, feeling him feed. Maybe sharing Philip's terror. I didn't know. I was apart from it and glad. The vampire stood, letting Philip fall to the stage, limp, unmoving. I stood without meaning to. The man scarred back, compulsed in a deep, shattering breath, as if he were fighting back from death. Maybe he was. He was alive. I sat back down. My knees felt weak. Sweat covered my palms and stung the cuts on my hands. He was alive and he enjoyed it. I wouldn't have believed it if someone had told me. I would have called them a liar. A vampire junkie. Surely to God I had seen everything now. Jean-Claude whispered, "Who wants a kiss?" No one moved for a heartbeat. Then hands holding money raised here and there. Not many, but a few. Most people looked confused, as if they had woken up from a bad dream. Monica was holding up money. Philip lay where he had been dropped, chest rising and falling. Robert the vampire came to Monica. She tucked money down his pants. He pressed his body, fanged mouth to her lips. The kiss was long and deep, full of probing tongues. They were tasting each other. The vampire drew away from Monica. Her hands at his neck tried to draw him back, but he pulled away. He turned to me. I shook my head and showed him empty hands. No money here, folks. He grabbed for me, snake quick. No time to think. My chair crashed to the floor. I was standing just out of reach. No ordinary human could have seen him coming. The jig, as they say, was up. A buzz of voices raced through the audience as they tried to figure out what had happened. Just your friendly neighborhood animator, folks. Nothing to get excited about. The vampire was still staring at me. Jean-Claude was suddenly beside me, and I hadn't seen him come. "Are you all right, Anita?" His voice held things that the words didn't hint at. Promised whispers in darkened rooms, under cool sheets. He sucked me under, rolled my mind like a wino after money, and it felt good. Crash, shrill. The noise thundered through my mind, chased the vampire out, held him at bay. My beeper had gone off. I blinked and staggered against the table. He reached out to steady me. "Don't touch me," I said. He smiled. "Of course." I pushed the button on my beeper to silence it. Thank you, God, that I had hung the beeper on my waistband instead of stuffing it in a purse. I might never have heard it otherwise. I called from the phone at the bar. The police wanted my expertise at the Hillcrest Cemetery. I had to work on my night off. Yippee! And I meant it. I offered to take Catherine with me, but she wanted to stay. Whatever else you can say about vampires, they're fascinating. It went with the job description, like drinking blood and working nights. It was her choice. I promised to come back in time to drive them home. Then I picked up my cross from the holy item check girl and slipped it in my shirt. Jean-Claude was standing by the door. He said, "I almost had you, my little animator." I glanced at his face, then quickly down. "Almost doesn't count, you blood-sucking bastard." Jean-Claude threw his head back and laughed. His laughter followed me out into the night, like velvet rubbing along my spine.